Hey everybody, welcome to the first Game Over Jesse's Top 10 list. In this episode we're going to be counting down the top 10 dungeons in the Legend of Zelda series. Now when I originally made a list, I noticed there were several dungeons that I enjoyed playing but didn't make it on the list. So I decided to separate this video into two parts. In this video, we'll be going through all the dungeons from 3D Zelda games, like Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, and Skyward Sword. In part 2, we will be counting down all of the dungeons from 2D Zelda, like A Link to the Past, Spirit Tracks, and A Link Between Worlds. Alright, let's get started. Number 10, the Earth Temple. We start off with the Earth Temple from the Wind Waker. If you're unfamiliar with this dungeon, we wound up here to restore power to your trusty Master Sword. Now the Wind Waker is known for its cel-shaded and cartoon-like graphic style. So when we're put in this dark and haunted dungeon, our whole experience with this beautiful and colorful world is turned upside down, and we're reminded not everything is bright and colorful in Hyrule. It combines the dark and creepy atmosphere from the Shadow Temple and the light puzzle and mirror shield gameplay mechanics from the Spirit Temple and fuses them together into a new gameplay experience and something special. On top of this, Nintendo introduces a brand new gameplay mechanic by giving us the opportunity to control our friend, and for the first time ever in a Zelda game, we can fly. While this game did make my top 10 list, it had far too many things wrong with it to be placed higher up. Number 9. The whole idea and background behind this dungeon really adds a darker atmosphere to it. We are told that it is a prison and used to send inmates directly to the underworld by use of the Twilight Mirror. In fact, this very thing happened to Ganondorf, but during his execution things went terribly wrong, and it actually resulted in the death of several sages. I could go on and on about the importance of its backstory and the plot of Twilight Princess, but the real reason we love the Arbiter's Ground is for its puzzles and gameplay. It is one of the only places in the entire game where we are actually able to use the spinner, one of the Zelda series' most interesting but unusual weapons. Like the Earth Temple from the Wind Waker, this dungeon shares some gameplay aspects from Ocarina of Time as well. Just like in the Forest Temple, we are required to hunt down the 4 Poes. This, combined with puzzles designed around the use of the spinner, is a fun way to add a fresh experience to old gameplay. My one complaint about this dungeon are the invisible rats that slow you down. Number 8. The Forest Temple. The first dungeon in Ocarina of Time is a piece of cake, as it was meant to be, with the next two getting a little more and more complicated and requiring you to think more. It's not until the Forest Temple that we're given a true dungeon in Ocarina of Time. But is it really a dungeon? It looks like an abandoned mansion in the back of the woods to me. This makes me wonder who lived there, and why. This dungeon introduces the Poe finding mechanic I mentioned in the Arbiter's Ground. We are introduced to paintings coming to life, twisting hallways, the use of keys make their very first appearance in a 3D Zelda game. We light arrows on fire for the first time ever. The first use of a water level changing mechanics are introduced, something that gave many of us migraines when we first wandered into the water temple completely unprepared. We get one of the best representations of a block pushing puzzle to ever exist in any game, something that the Zelda series is actually known for. But most importantly, we're given a standard as to what to expect from later dungeons in the game. My main complaint about this dungeon is the dreaded creepy wall masters. As a kid, I hated these things. As an adult, I still do. I mean, who wants to be taken from the middle of a dungeon to the very beginning? And if it's your first time playing through, you may not even remember how to exactly get to where you were. Just imagine if the water temple had these things lurking around. Number 7. The Ancient Cistern. But wait, is it even a water dungeon? From every past 3D Zelda game, Nintendo has pounded into our heads that we need to constantly be changing water levels every few minutes to continue in a water dungeon. This isn't the case this time. Nintendo did an excellent job making a water-based dungeon not feel like a typical water dungeon. We're introduced the whip for the first time ever in the game, and it builds off what was introduced in the Wind Waker. This dungeon is filled with unique puzzles, and to top it off, once we're a good ways in the dungeon, it completely takes a 180 and we're introduced to zombie bokoblins. The top half of the dungeon is bright, colorful, and peaceful for the most part, but the bottom half takes inspiration from dungeons such as the Shadow Temple, Arbiter's Grounds, and Icana Castle, which is nice considering we aren't given a full Shadow Temple style dungeon in this game. Number 6. The Water Temple. What more can be said? It's because of this dungeon that every time we see a Zora or a lake for the first time in any new Zelda game, that we tense up as our stomachs start churning because we know what lies ahead. Okay, well maybe I'm over-exaggerating, but honestly I think everyone is when it comes to this dungeon. Yes, it's a little challenging and possibly the hardest 3D Zelda dungeon, but anyone that has played the final dungeon in either the original Legend of Zelda or Zelda 2 will tell you to put a clean diaper on and quit being a baby, because shitting yourself over a dungeon from a game that's designed for kids of all ages isn't something to complain about. But now you're probably thinking, well that's great Jesse, but are you done complaining? Alright, now why exactly does the water temple make the list? Because it is a dungeon done right. I won't lie, when I was a kid I gave up on the dungeon for months. It's even the reason my brother stopped playing the game entirely. It wasn't until a lot of struggle that I was able to beat it. The water level changing was a very unique gameplay mechanic none of us had seen before. We're reintroduced to one of the main characters in the game, and we're given the most badass mini-boss ever. The symmetrical maze-like feel of the whole dungeon, with connecting rooms, was pure brilliance on Nintendo's end. My only complaint on this dungeon are the vortexes after fighting Dark Link. Number 5. Blenay Mining Facility. It's one of the only few dungeons in the Zelda series that didn't just give us one, but gave us 2 dungeons. With the constant use of the time shift stones, we're basically given 2 versions of the same dungeon in one. It had some of the most challenging puzzles in the entire game, and was the only one I needed to look up a strategy guide for. I was stuck in this room for hours, it seemed, trying to explore every inch I could in both the past and the present. This dungeon took one of the most boring weapons of the game, and built such great puzzles around the use of it. That ended up making the weapon one of the most fun items to use in the entire game. My one complaint with this dungeon is how blind I must have been to have not seen the fan above the door. Number 4. The Spirit Temple. Specifically, the Master Quest version. We're required to beat this dungeon not once but twice. We make our way through a haunted desert just to be told we need to return as a child. Luckily we can safely warp straight here this time. We make our way back in, crawl through the hole, and are immediately given some of the most creative puzzles of the entire Zelda series. We beat one of the most fierce enemies in the entire series as well, and finally, we can continue through the dungeon as an adult. We make our way back here to the temple expecting some more of the same stuff we were given in the first half, but no. Instead of rehashing some of the same things over and over again and making it more symmetrical, we were given brand new puzzles to conquer. The use of the mirror shield left me begging for more, and since we pretty much have all the items by this time in the game, fighting enemies became more of an experiment than just tapping B and moving on. My only complaint for this dungeon is that I wished it would have required time traveling more than once. I wish we could have completed a section of the dungeon as an adult, and it opened a new path as a child, and vice versa. Traveling in and out of the dungeon would have been a pain, but they could have taken the original concept and made it something truly unique. Number 3. City in the Sky. It's another dungeon that isn't a traditional dungeon, or at least the way it's found isn't. I mean, it's not even located in Hyrule, but above it, and we're given a very whimsical way of reaching. The location of it being in the cloud makes me wonder if it's a subtle hint as to what we were to expect from Skyward Sword. So what's so special about this dungeon? It's the first time we're given 2 of the same weapon. Again, it's not the weapon, but the use of it in the dungeon that makes it so high on the list. We're able to reach places never thought possible, and are introduced to a brand new gameplay mechanic for the first time in any Zelda game. We're able to dual wield 2 of the same weapons. Whether we're claw-shotting from one flying plant to another, or hanging on one pillar, counting the seconds before it falls to time our shot to the next platform perfectly, we also discover a little more about the Cuckoos, and their backstory here. I have no real complaint about this dungeon other than Nintendo could have added some more puzzles to it, and that's just because I enjoyed it so much and wished it was longer. Number 2. The Sand Ship. Time travel? Robots? Pirates? Time-traveling robot pirates? Is this even a Zelda game? Unlike most dungeons, it's not really a traditional Zelda dungeon. We're not going into a cave, a volcano, a castle, or anything that we're used to. We're on a ship. It's a great departure from what we're used to. While I try not to list weapons as part of reasoning behind a dungeon making this list, it's not exactly the bow and arrow, but the use of it that places this dungeon on my list. Unlike the Blenay mining facility, we're given just one time shift stone, and figuring out when and how to activate it is what makes this such a clever dungeon. Whether it's from a hole in the ceiling, or you're standing in clear view of it, the entire dungeon and most of its puzzles revolve around this one stone. It's amazing what the great people at Nintendo can accomplish when starting out with such a simple idea and building upon it. Also, it has cool robots. Number 1. Stone Tower Temple. I absolutely love this dungeon. I know it's high on a lot of top 10 lists, but that's just because a lot of people agree. Each dungeon in Majora's Mask focused on one or two items and heavy use of one specific mask. This dungeon breaks the mold by forcing you to use each individual mask, as well as your huge arsenal of weapons we've collected along the way. If that's not enough, you walk into a room and see a chest on the ceiling. After running around for who knows how long and scratching your head on how to get it, you just leave it alone, thinking maybe I can knock it down later somehow. Then for the first and only time ever, we're forced to flip the entire dungeon upside down and our minds are blown, creating more puzzles and allowing us to advance to new locations and finally getting those chests. As I mentioned earlier, this is also one of the few dungeons that feels like a 2-in-1 deal. Honestly, not enough could be said about this dungeon. Its difficulty is perfect, all the enemies allow for a lot of experimentation with different weapons, and the puzzles require you to use more than common sense to actually solve them. On top of all of this, the amount of fan theories revolving around this one dungeon is incredible. From it being a spiritual place to worship Majora, a tower to climb to the heavens, the body outlines on the side of the pillars, upside down Triforces, we really don't know what the truth is behind this temple. Whereas all the other dungeons in the game have a clear purpose, Stone Tower Temple is shrouded in mystery. Maybe we will get some kind of backstory or a reference in a newer Zelda game, who knows. But that's why it's number 1 on the list. It does everything perfect, combining gameplay, atmosphere, and story into a complete experience. On top of all of this, we get to listen to one of the best and most addictive songs in the entire series all the way through the dungeon. But that's a top list for another time as well. And until then, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel. I'll be creating other videos as well, such as news, rumor roundups, fan theories, and creating more original music, and having special collaborations with other YouTubers.
Is that an invite, Jesse? Hi, this is Macintyre Productions. Please visit my channel for more videos focused on The Legend of Zelda and a future collaboration between Game Over Jesse and I.